AP 120, Lab 13, Topics, Digestive System. So the digestive system is composed primarily of the digestive tract, which is approximately a 30-foot long tube going from the mouth all the way down to the anus. And this tube is also known as the alimentary canal. So the alimentary canal, that 30-foot long tube going from the mouth to the anus. Also included in the digestive system are accessory organs that aid in mechanical and chemical digestion, such as teeth, salivary glands, liver, and so on. So we have the alimentary canal starting with the oral cavity, going to the pharynx, then the esophagus, from the esophagus to the stomach, from the stomach to the duodenum of the small intestine, the jejunum of the small intestine, the ileum of the small intestine. And then from there, you go into the large intestine with the cecum, the ascending colon, transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and way at the bottom, the anus. The accessory structures that are very important include the teeth, the tongue, parotid salivary glands, sublingual salivary glands, submandibular salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, and behind the stomach is the pancreas. Here is our head model. As you can see on the outside near the ear is where you would find the parotid gland. And then in the oral cavity is where you'll find the tongue. Underneath the tongue is the sublingual gland, and then underneath or next to the mandible would be the submandibular gland. So sublingual directly under tongue, submandibular basically right next to the mandible, but in this image the mandible's been cut away. The roof of the oral cavity is called the hard palate, where you have bone, and then soft palate, where there is no bone. And then that little bit at the end, that bit of tissue that dangles down in the back of the oral cavity, that piece of tissue is called the uvula. So the uvula dangles off of the soft palate. The soft palate and the uvula have important functions. When we swallow, they push up and block the nasal cavity, so they prevent food from going up into the nasal cavity. Then we have, of course, the teeth. There are, in the average adult, 8 incisors for canine, 8 premolars, and 12 molars, for a total of 32 teeth. However, many adults do have their wisdom teeth removed, which means they would only have 8 molars. So the very front teeth are the incisors. Next to the incisors is a canine. Next to the canine is 2 premolars. And next to the premolars are 3 molars in an adult with all of their teeth. So for 1/4 of the jaw, 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, 3 molars. And then to get the total number, you just multiply this by 4. All right, the portion of the tooth that is above the gum line is called the crown. The portion of the tooth that goes down into the socket is called the root. If you look at the tooth in terms of layers, the most superficial layer, that is usually whitish in color, is the enamel, hardest substance our body can produce. Deep to the enamel is the dentin, which makes up the bulk of the tooth. And then deep to the dentin is the pulp. The pulp is in the pulp cavity, and then the cavity within the root parts is called the root canal. So pulp is both in the pulp cavity and the root canal. Pulp cavity, root canal. Oral cavity leads to the pharynx. For the digestive system, we utilize the oral pharynx and the laryngopharynx, not the nasopharynx. And then the food or drink will go into the esophagus, which is posterior to or behind the larynx and trachea. So here's the esophagus. Here also, the esophagus passing through the thoracic cavity, leading to the stomach. The beginning of the stomach is the lower esophageal sphincter, which can close to prevent food materials from going back up into the esophagus. You can break the stomach up into three main regions: the fundus for the hump, the body for most of the stomach, and then the pylorus at the tail end. The pylorus ends in the pyloric sphincter, which controls the movement of materials into the small intestine. On the walls inside of the stomach are lots of little mucosal folds. These folds are called one rugae or many rugae. So we have lots of rugae on the walls of the stomach. Here is the stomach again in the abdominal cavity. It is next to the liver. The liver has a right lobe and a left lobe. The liver produces bile. And then this little green lump here, that's representing the gallbladder. The gallbladder stores bile. Posterior to the stomach, so behind the stomach, is the pancreas. Pancreas is important because it produces digestive enzymes and bicarbonate that neutralizes the acids from the stomach. Here is a model showing the pancreas. So this is the pancreas here. Here is the gallbladder. The brown here represents the liver. The gallbladder attaches to a cystic duct that then fuses with the common hepatic duct to form the common bile duct. So again, the gallbladder cystic duct fuses with the liver's common hepatic duct to form the common bile duct, carries bile into the duodenum, which is part of the small intestine. And then in the pancreas, there is the pancreatic duct, which carries the pancreas's secretions out into the duodenum. And you see that the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct have to fuse together to form the opening to the duodenum. So again, here is the duodenum again. It's the shortest part of the small intestine, sort of a C-shaped curve. That then leads to the jejunum, which is in the upper left quadrant, and then finally the ileum, which is the largest portion of the small intestine, found primarily in the lower right quadrant. So small intestine includes the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Here is a model of a cross-section of the wall of the small intestine. So we cut through the intestine to look at the layers and structures in its wall. There are four main layers. There is the mucosa, which is the layer next to the opening, the space inside of the small intestine. Then superficial to that is the submucosa, and then from there is the muscularis, and then finally the serosa. So the four layers of the small intestine: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa. The mucosa includes these finger-like projections called one villus or many villi. Within the villi, there is this tube-like structure called a lacteal. Lacteal, part of the lymphatic system, important for carrying lipids. And then also in the villi are lots and lots of capillaries. So these represent the capillaries that also carry nutrients absorbed by the small intestine. In the submucosal layer, we can find lymph nodules, important for dealing with any pathogens that get absorbed into the small intestine. And then in the muscularis layer, we have a circular layer of muscle tissue going around the small intestine like a ring, and then the longitudinal layer of smooth muscle tissue that stretches the length of the small intestine. So circular layer and longitudinal layer, all both smooth muscle tissue. And then, of course, the serosal layer. All right, from there we go to the large intestine. Large intestine includes the cecum, which is this compartment here, followed by the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and the descending colon. This is the direction feces is traveling in the large intestine. So again, here is the cecum. Hanging off the cecum is the appendix. The cecum is next to the ileocecal sphincter. So this sphincter controls the movement of materials from the small intestine, from the ileum, into the cecum. Ileocecal, ileum, cecum, sphincter. So again, cecum, appendix, leading to the ascending colon. Other things worth pointing out is that this tissue here represents the mesentery, which is part of the peritoneum, and helps connect the intestines to each other and also carries lots of blood vessels. Haustrum is one single pouch along the large intestine. So here's a haustrum, there's a haustrum, there's a haustrum, there's a haustrum. This white strip going along the length of the large intestine is called the tinea coli. The tinea coli is smooth muscle tissue that, well, helps form the haustrum. And finally, at the end of the descending colon is the sigmoid colon. So again, it goes ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and then sigmoid colon, which then goes to the rectum and the anus. So again, sigmoid colon then leads to the rectum and the anus. And that is it for this lecture.